So hi everyone, I am Robin Farmian. Today I'm going to be talking about the shift going on in healthcare delivery, where the patient receives their care. And it's gone way beyond your standard telemedicine visit. So a little about me. My life goal is to impact a minimum of 100 million patients worldwide. I am an early stage entrepreneur in pharmaceutical, med device, and AI software. Currently, I'm working on things like virtual reality for stroke and brain injury rehabilitation, as well as oncology, remote patient monitoring, and clinical trials. But that's kind of crazy, right? Like, how many people do you know that are not only early stage in pharmaceutical, which is pretty much the highest risk type of company you can get into, but has that kind of life goal? Well, with me, the reason I decided to impact 100 million patients was because at the age of 16, I was misdiagnosed with an autoimmune disease. All told, I've had 43 hospitalizations, 6 major surgeries, and 3 organs removed. Now, at the age of 26, this was 7 years after I'd had my entire large intestine surgically removed. For the GI experts, it was a total colectomy with J-pouch. So my doctors were telling me I was cured, but I wasn't. And I was in pretty extreme pain. So over a period of years, they kept upping and upping my opiate dose until eventually I was on 80 milligrams a day of methadone. Now, that is an absolutely gigantic dose of drugs, and I hated it. So I went back to my doctor and I said, I need off this medication now. She said, okay, well, next step would be to surgically implant a morphine pump into your spine. I was like, are you kidding? I was 26 years old. I was essentially a shut-in. I couldn't work. I could barely take a shower on a daily basis. And they were essentially telling me that was the rest of my life. So I said, absolutely not. And I went home that night and I fired my entire healthcare team. Dropped my own methadone dose by about 40%, which I would never recommend anybody do. Of course, you're risking seizures, but I was in my 20s. I didn't know that back then. I ended up getting diagnosed correctly after that with Crohn's disease, put on a biologic called Remicade, and within 24 hours of that first dose, I went into remission. It happened overnight. So that's why I do what I do, because I believe in paying it back by paying it forward. I know that I am alive today, not just because of that one doctor or that one pharmaceutical company, but the healthcare industry as a whole. Medical schools, the government, payers, pharma, software, and most importantly, everyone here today and at home. Because what you have chosen to do with your life is the foundation and the backbone of healthcare. So I want to say for myself and for all other patients, huge thank you for doing what you do. Thank you guys. All right, so now that I have completely shocked you, let's talk about the technologies and trends now going on. Take a scenario. You've got a patient with a point-of-care diagnostic device. Of course, what that means is the diagnostic device comes to the patient versus the patient having to go to a traditional setting like a hospital or clinic. So I can say, take the Apple Watch FDA-cleared single-lead EKG, send the data to the cloud, where it can be shared across the care team, in some cases integrated into the EMR, and analyzed using artificial intelligence. And then if I do need to see a doctor, I can do it, of course, right then and there, on demand, using telemedicine. But we're seeing things go way past that standard visit. Companies like Heal, H-E-A-L, I've used them for a few years now. They send a doctor to my home on demand. So I can order a doctor same day or next day. They work 7 to 7 on weekdays and weekends. And I've done my flu shot with them 2 different years. I just make an appointment with the app. They send a doctor and a nurse to my home. 5 minutes later, they give me the flu shot and they're gone. And that is 100% covered by my insurance company, 0 copay. Well, let me tell you what some of the giants in the world of healthcare are doing. You know United, it's the largest of the privates. Well, they happen to be both my insurance company right now, but they brought me in to give the same kind of talk to their C-suite. And so I got to kind of learn what's going on behind the scenes with their big employer accounts. They have been pushing telemedicine for at least 2 years. Everything I'm talking about, by the way, started way before the pandemic. The pandemic has just accelerated it. Now, United Health, they end up sending me an email, say once a week or so, and it gives me some information and tells me, hey, Robin, if you want something like a weight loss coach, we're going to give it to you remotely for free, 0 copay. They also say things like, if you want to see a doctor right now, click here for one of our doctor on-demand partners with telemedicine, and we're going to cover that for you. Now, CVS, they have almost 10,000 retail pharmacies nationwide. They are investing over $300 million into beefing up their primary care style offerings. Now, they want to really focus on some of the most expensive diseases, things like coronary artery disease, hypertension, and diabetes. Now, Walmart is also doing their primary care style offerings in store, and they're starting to build that up. I know we've seen some fits and starts over the years, but now I think it's really serious. And so they want to cover the patient from A to Z. You can walk into one of these big Walmarts, you see a dentist, you see an optician for your eyeglasses, you see your primary care style offerings, whether that's a physician's assistant or a nurse practitioner. And then, of course, you get your blood labs, your pharmacy, and all your groceries in one place. Now, the thing is, 90% of the US lives within easy driving distance of a Walmart. The other thing that's interesting about Walmart is they have about 1.3 million employees here in the United States, and they're self-insured. So they are actually sending their employees across state lines to have things like cheaper surgery done. Now, Humana and CMS, again, this started way before the pandemic. They are making a big push to have dialysis done in the home. Now, this is a huge opportunity space for brand new companies or clinics or hospitals that have a lot of dialysis patients. Because right now, the dialysis industry is controlled by 2 companies, get about 90% of the business. This is almost a $25 billion a year industry. But with Humana and CMS pushing this into the home, of course, there needs to be a lot of new capital expenditure to get new dialysis machines that can actually go into the home. And so the other thing you see on the slide is a company called Outset. They went public, IPO'd last year, and it's this beautiful self-contained dialysis unit that's extremely portable. So I can see hospitals or clinics with a lot of kidney patients buying one of these so they can actually bring it into the patient's home a few times a week and keep their care all under one roof, so to speak. We're also seeing a lot going on in the world of direct-to-consumer blood labs. Now, these are things like liver function test, kidney function test, thyroids, CBC, platelet differential. And in case anybody has a really hot date coming up next week, they do about 10 of the STDs. So that's probably one of their bigger markets, right? Now, the way these work, Quest and LabCorp, 2 of the giants, of course, in laboratories, they have their own direct consumer tests. The way those work is you go online between $60 and say $350, depending on what you're testing for. You buy it online, and then you go into a Quest or a LabCorp. This does not go through your doctor. You now literally can order blood labs on yourself as a patient. Now, the way other companies work, like Let's Get Checked, and one of the interesting things about Let's Get Checked, that down there in the corner, is United Healthcare with their Optum Ventures invested in this, even though it doesn't go through the doctor and doesn't go through the insurance company. And when insurance companies make those kinds of investments, I kind of pricks my ears up and like, that's interesting. But Let's Get Checked, the way they work is you go on cvs.com or letsgetchecked.com. You order the test kit. When it comes, you prick the end of your finger, drops of blood, throw it back into the mail, and they use CLIA certified laboratories, so you can actually rely on the results. Now, point of care diagnostics, or what I like to call diagnostics on demand. Raise a hands in the room and tell me in the chat if you are virtually. Definitely answer all my questions in the chat. I will definitely go back and look at them. So raise a hands in the room. How many people have heard of TytoCare? TYTO. Quite a few, nice. So they launched out of Best Buy a couple of years ago, and keep that in your head for a little bit later on in the talk. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Best Buy. But what this is a FDA-cleared telemedicine tool. It comes with a video camera and 4 clinical-grade medical device applicators: the otoscope for looking in the ears, the stethoscope, temperature monitor, and tongue depressor. Now, the really cool thing is imagine you're not feeling well, or say you have a screaming toddler with an earache, and you definitely don't want to go to an emergency room or an urgent care because you've got a screaming toddler. Well, instead, you go on TytoCare's app, you call a doctor on video, and they are partnered with Amwell, which is one of the largest of the telemedicine companies. The doctor on video walks you through using these 4 clinical-grade, FDA-cleared medical devices on yourself or, say, on your child. And because the doctor is actually seeing the live video camera feed, it's almost as if she's putting her hands through the computer screen. So imagine you've got the otoscope and you're looking in your ear. The doctor can literally say things like, move it a little bit to the right or move it a little bit to the left, so she can have a clear view. By the way, this is $300 direct to consumer, and I believe the telemedicine visits are typically $60 to $70. Now, this is my living room. I get the vast majority of my healthcare now in my apartment or within a 2-block radius. Here, I'm getting Remicade. Now, I've been on this medication for about 20 years, and no one try and do the math. But the first 15 years, I got it done in the normal hospital infusion clinics. Let me tell you, I would come home and it would take me 8 days to recover from the medication. I thought, I'm dealing with a biologic. This is proteins. Of course, I probably don't feel well. It's just a side effect. Well, United and quite a few of the other insurance companies are starting to drop doing things like biologics in the hospital because it's too expensive. So about 5 or 6 years ago, United said, hey, if you want us to pay for your Remicade, you're going to have to do it at an alternate site infusion clinic or in the home. And I was like, you can do it in the home? I would have moved it into my house 20 years ago. So the way it works is they use a company called Option Care. My GI doctor just sends the script to Option Care. Now, Option Care used to be called Walgreens Infusion. They're now owned by a PE company. And Option Care controls about 90% of the alternate site infusion clinics and in-home pharmacy care. This is a really big opportunity space. So the way it works is my doctor just sends those orders. They ship the medication to me on ice, because it's a biologic. I throw it in my refrigerator, and then they deploy a nurse the next week to actually mix the medication on site and then administer it over 3 or 5 hours. Now, my recovery time went from that hardcore 8 days to a really mild 3 days, just by changing the patient environment. I didn't realize I wasn't feeling well because when I go to Remicade in the hospital, it would be a windowless room, it would be extremely noisy, there'd be 15 other patients and their caregivers in that same room with just like thin curtains, and I'd be sitting there for 5 hours. That was why I wasn't feeling well when I came back. I was just so stressed out about things like the constant noise and just being in this room with 0 windows. Now, take this one step further. I mentioned I've done my vaccines in the home. I get my Remicade in the home. I also get my blood draws in the home. So the nurse from Option Care draws my labs, and she drops them off at the nearest LabCorp or Quest. But let's take this even one step further. A couple years ago, I got one of those GI flus, it's supposed to last about 24 hours. Well, when you have Crohn's disease and no large intestine, it is life-threatening and within hours. By Friday night, I went to bed and I was like, not sure I feel that well. By Saturday morning at 7 a.m., I knew if I did not get IV saline and magnesium, I would probably die. But the problem was, I was already so depleted, I could not get myself to an Uber to get to an emergency room. So I'd have to call an ambulance. Now, the nearest emergency room to my house is a level 1 trauma center, and I would be going there presenting with abdominal pain. It's like, that is an absolutely horrific use of resources. I knew what was wrong. I knew I just needed IV saline, which any nurse their first day out of nursing school could go and give me. I did not need the type of care that they're ready for at a level 1 trauma center. And so I decided instead to use a company called IV Doc. I went on their app, and there's many, many companies like this. It's direct-to-consumer IV saline. And so I ordered 2 liters of saline on myself and 400 milligrams of magnesium. And while this does not go through my doctor and it does not go through my insurance company, they do have a doctor on staff. And he saw that I ordered 2 liters, which is actually quite a lot of fluid. And so he called me immediately and said, "What's going on? Why did you order 2?" And I told him the situation, and he expedited a nurse to my home. And within an hour, they were giving me 2 liters of saline and then the mega magnesium. And I did that for Saturday and Sunday, each day. And then by Monday morning, I'd been communicating with my GI doctor and my primary care, and so he was able to send orders to Option Care, the one that my insurance company will cover, to give me more saline Monday and Tuesday, as well as draw some blood labs. I managed to avoid an ambulance ride, an emergency room, and a 2 or 3 potentially day hospitalization by kind of hacking it together. Not only that, but it cost less than $2,000 for the 4 days of care. How much would it have cost just for the emergency room at a level 1 trauma center, right? Now, I recognize most patients are not going to hack something like this together, but the industry is going this way. Raise your hands in the room, how many people have heard of CMS's new ET3 program? Okay, a couple. Tell me at home if you have, because I'm going to read the chat afterwards. Now, this is a 5-year voluntary payment model. They just launched it. In fact, they were supposed to launch early last year, but the pandemic, ironically, held up that launch. And so they have a little over 180 different ambulance suppliers that have signed up for this voluntary 5-year payment program. Now, it's really cool. When a patient calls 911, they send out the ambulance, and it's a little bit more outfitted than you would normally have with an ambulance. And it's going to have a nurse practitioner or a physician's assistant, as well as a technician. And if they are able to take care of the patient in place, they do. So in something like my case with IV saline, they would definitely have that on board, and they could have taken care of me in place. If they need a doctor consultation, they do it right then and there by video. And only then, if they still haven't been able to take care of the patient in place, they bring them either to primary care, dialysis, urgent care, and only as a last resort, the emergency room. Now, this program, while it's voluntary now, I am guessing it's going to be pretty successful. Not only that, but there are a lot of startups now in this space. So Dispatch Health. The reason I'm telling you that it's a $1.7 billion valuation, you're probably like, Robin, we don't work in startups. Like, what do we care? You care because any type of startup company that reaches over $1 billion valuation has some very serious investors and money behind it, which means it probably will not fail. In Dispatch's case, Humana, as well as I think it was Cigna or Aetna, have actually invested in them. So you've got some of the big private payers putting their money in this new kind of model. Now, Dispatch Health, it works the same way as I just mentioned with the ET3 program, and it's covered by insurance pretty much across the board. And so in the states this is available in, the copay, if you have, say, Medicare and you have secondary insurance, is only gonna be about a $5 copay. If you have commercial insurance, like I do, it's going to be about $45 copay. But really, that's what you're gonna pay out of pocket when you use something like Dispatch Health. Now, if you don't have insurance, it is a $275 flat fee for anything that they need to do, whether they're drawing labs or giving you medication. This is a new model, and we're going to see a lot going on in the next 5 to 7 years with this. Now, raise your hands in the room, how many people have heard of the Moving Health Home Advocacy Group? Probably just a couple, okay. Tell me if you have at home. This launched 3 weeks ago. This is why you haven't heard of it yet. It is brand new, but Amazon Care is leading it up. Now, Amazon is a $1 trillion company now. They can move industries. Now, most of us have been wondering, okay, is this CMS going to keep, the enhanced reimbursement for telemedicine? What's going to happen after the pandemic? Amazon. Amazon is leading the way in working to readjust reimbursement on anything that's offered in the home. They will get this done. So if those changes right now with CMS do not stay permanent, we will get it back, right? This is something, if you don't remember anything else from my keynote, remember to keep your eye on this particular advocacy group. Now, CMS, of course, is leading the way in remote patient monitoring codes. So raise of hands, how many people have been working with remote patient monitoring codes? Have you used them at all? Nice. Oh, that's awesome. I love to see that. So CMS unbundled a couple of their codes a couple years ago now from telemedicine, and they have a number of codes now. They help reimburse the physician for things like setting up the patient with remote patient monitoring, then actively doing the monitoring, even though most of the time it is actually done by software. And they're also reimbursed for any communication that happens as a result of remote patient monitoring. Now, as CMS goes, so goes the industry. I call it peer pressure for the private payers. Once CMS sets the gold standard, we can expect the rest of the industry to also offer this. Now, we are seeing a lot of clinical grade, FDA cleared remote patient monitoring devices. So on this slide, there's some really cool ones. The one in the middle, that is by Omron. Omron is already the world's giant in remote patient monitoring and blood pressure monitors. This is a blood pressure monitoring watch that uses the standard cuff method that you have up here, but in a watch, which is very cool. $500 direct to consumer. You see on there the wee things. This has a clinical grade EKG sensor. Why you care about that EKG sensor is because it's measuring for something called atrial fibrillation, AFib, which is typically a silent disease. But if you do have it, you are up to 5 times more likely to have a stroke, right? So there are other ones on the slide. The Oxytone does SpO2 monitoring around the wrist using that same technology that you see the normal pulse oximeters at the end of your finger. It's called PPG technology. We've known how to do that for years and years. They're now doing it using a watch. BioBee is doing blood pressure monitoring through the skin on the chest. And Apple. So Apple outsold the entire Swiss watch industry over the past 2 or 3 years in a row. There are more than 100 million Apple Watches that have been distributed, and they've got 2 clinical grade sensors right now, one for SpO2 and one for EKG monitoring. But they are planning on making that Apple Watch multifunctional, significantly more, and they will continue to add on vital signs and go through the FDA. Now, this is one of the very few things I'm talking about today that has not cleared the FDA, but I am expecting this to clear the FDA within 2 years. Because, guess what? Google launched their own version. So here I'm using a company called Anura, A-N-U-R-A. But yeah, Google has their same exact technology. The way it works is I look at the camera on my smartphone, and it takes video essentially for 30 seconds. What it's doing is it's measuring the light through the skin so it can see the blood flow. You can see on my face there's 4 little dots. That's the app actually doing that. It's called transdermal optical imaging. It's able to decipher blood pressure and heart rate variability using a smartphone camera, no other device out there. Now, my nurse, when she comes, she takes my blood pressure 5 times throughout the infusion. So we checked this, and I took my blood pressure using the app, and she took my blood pressure using the standard cuff method around the upper arm, and the numbers matched. This is not going to be for entertainment purposes only for very long. Google will likely get this through the FDA pretty quickly. All right, raise your hands. How many people have been seeing a lot with the CGMs, the continuous glucose monitors? Abbott and Freestyle Libre. Oh, nice. Okay, that's awesome. So you guys know how that works. It measures glucose in interstitial fluid, which is a slight delay, of course, from the blood glucose. But you might not have heard of Eversense. Eversense is a 3-month-long implantable. So the patient still has to go to the clinic, and then they implant this little tiny sensor, you see it there, that's Bluetooth enabled, and it stays there for 3 months. So it's easier for the patient. In fact, in Europe, that same exact device is CE mark cleared for 6 months to be an implantable. We're even seeing sensors going on to any existing inhaler, FDA cleared. This is fantastic for things like COPD and asthma because it tracks when, where, right, and how much. And that's a big deal because, of course, as patients, we don't sit there and we write everything down, but here, any type of inhaler that these sensors will fit on, it is recording that automatically and sending that information, if you want it to the physician. Okay, so this blew my mind. This just got FDA clearance about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and they've been working on it for 11 years. But now they've been able to do this. A lot of companies are going to start working on this as well. This is a 30-second breathalyzer test, and it's able, with the 30 seconds, to pick up those 10 vital signs, which is completely mind-blowing to me. But this is FDA cleared, it is clinical grade, and you can do it remotely, just a 30-second breath, and you've got things like your EKG. We're also seeing sensors going into fabrics. This is fantastic for diabetes care. You see the guy is standing on that foot mat there. That is a company called Pediatrics. And what it's doing is it's measuring the temperature of the bottom of your feet. And the socks, that's doing the exact same thing. It has sensors that measures the temperature of the bottom of your feet. Now, why that's important is because in the world of diabetes, if you get a hot spot at the bottom of your foot, this can turn into an ulcer, and if it's not treated successfully, that can actually lead to an amputation, which is heartbreaking to even say, right? So what these do is they monitor the temperature at the bottom of your feet, they record the data, they send it to the care team, as well as the provider, and it finds hot spots way before it actually breaks the skin, so your patient no longer is at risk for losing their leg or their foot. Oh, by the way, prescription is required. The other thing I wanted to tell you about a lot of these is they're on what's called a subscription model. So raise your hands in the room, how many people have too many subscriptions to like Netflix and Hulu and magazines? Okay, yeah. We're starting to see subscription models in healthcare. It makes a lot of sense, right? Because it's not just the device that's clinical grade, it's the ongoing month-to-month monitoring. And so what you're looking at here, this is a company called Vital Connect, and it's just one of the many companies on the market doing this. It is a single lead EKG that has a 24-hour disposable patch. You can wear it in the hospital, and then you can send the patients home with it, so you can monitor, especially your cardiac patients. By the way, there is a handout with this particular, for this talk, and on it I put a link to this study in case you're curious. There's about 15 different links that you can dive into some of the stuff that I'm talking about. But Vital Connect was able to predict with almost a week in advance of a readmission for their cardiac patients. That's a really big deal. All right, so I'm gonna spend the last half an hour on artificial intelligence because there's some really cool things going on behind the scenes. After that, we're gonna open it up for about 15 minutes to questions, so definitely start thinking about your questions now. Now, the reason we are starting to see so much about the world of artificial intelligence in healthcare is because of this one simple fact. When you're talking about artificial intelligence, life begins at 1 billion data points. Anything less than that, you absolutely can't even think about using AI. Now, in the world of healthcare, that is exploding. Last year, it was a little under a $5 billion industry. It's growing to over $45 billion industry over the next 4 years. Now, you don't have to remember those numbers. What I'm just trying to get across is that it is exploding and exponentially increasing. The really cool thing about technology is it makes things seamless. A lot of companies are working to be that beautiful dashboard that can give you that minute-by-minute report card on your health, or say on your family's health. Now, there are different models here. There are at least 70 remote patient monitoring companies that come with their own software, or they are just the regular software and device agnostic. And what they're doing is they integrate that data coming off the clinical grade wearable device, and then most of the time they send it to the provider, right? And so the data, the clinical grade data, is flowing to the provider, but not in Apple's case. So Apple, not only are they a $1 trillion company as well, but they took the vast majority of profits from the entire music industry for years, just by being that thin software layer. And that's what they're trying to do here in healthcare. Now, Apple is partnered with most hospitals in the United States, and with just a couple of presses of a button on your iPhone, you can download the patient portal side of your EMRs. And it aggregates them together, integrates them, and then pulls in that clinical grade data from things like the Apple Watch. So you see how it's flowing the data from the provider to Apple. Something to keep your eye on. Now, we've seen over 60 FDA-cleared AI-based software programs over the past few years. The very first one to clear the FDA was in 2012, but most really have happened in the last 3 years. Now, most of these software programs are around things like radiology, because of course, that's what AI is best at, which is pattern analysis, which is imaging analysis. Now, most of these software programs really just exist to help and be a tool for the highly paid specialists. You know, you've got your neurologists, you've got your radiologists, and the AI software will say, hey, look over here, or look over here, there's a discrepancy, and really just help you out with the scans. All of them, that is, except for one, IDX. It's the country's first AI-based algorithm software that cleared the FDA that does not require a healthcare professional of any kind to interpret the results. In this one case, they are replacing that highly paid ophthalmologist. Now, this is really interesting because for things like diabetic retinopathy, most of us in general don't go to a specialist, every year when we're supposed to. I'm guilty of that with my GI doctor. I don't usually see him exactly every year. And so this can shift the exam from ophthalmology over into the world of primary care. The way it works is the patient has to go to still see a provider, and they take images of the eye using what's called a fundus camera, also called a retinal camera. And there are FDA-cleared retinal cameras that attach to your smartphone now. And so you can go to primary care, and they can take the images. The software will give you a binary answer in under 60 seconds. Yes, the patient has early-stage diabetic retinopathy, or no, the patient is good to go. Come back next year and get checked. Because diabetic retinopathy is the leading cause of blindness in diabetes, this can help a patient save their sight. Now, this is what's called ANI, artificial narrow intelligence. And that's all that is, right? So it is incredibly good at doing one very specific thing. This software will not pick up anything else that's wrong with the patient's eyes. It can only identify diabetic retinopathy. And so in Silicon Valley, we have a saying, AI is not going to replace doctors, right? It's doctors who use AI that are going to replace doctors who don't, right? Because with artificial narrow intelligence, they are not going to catch anything else that highly paid specialist will be able to catch. All right, one more example in this particular imaging analysis. It's a company called Viz.ai. So raise your hands in the room, how many people have used or even been aware of the Medicare's new technology add-on payment? Anyone? Okay, yeah, I see a bunch. Very cool. So what this is when a patient comes into the emergency room and they are presenting with a potential LVO stroke. An LVO stroke is some of the most damaging type of strokes. And so minutes and even seconds count when you're dealing with something like that. And so the patient is presenting with a potential stroke. You use Viz.ai's software, and Medicare is going to reimburse up to $1,040. But in addition, an LVO stroke is now treatable or eligible for what's called a thrombectomy, which is reimbursed at 3 times the amount of the typical medically managed stroke, right? So you can see here why using this kind of software, massive benefit for the patient, earlier catching, much better. But then the provider wins as well, because not only are they reimbursed for catching it even earlier than they would have normally, but then for treating it in a certain way. Now, this company is really, really cool. So this is a company called BrainCheck. And again, it helps shift those exams from the highly paid specialists that are difficult to get into and have long waiting lists into the world of primary care. Now, BrainCheck is taking the standard neurological exams that you have at a neurologist's office, but they have electronified them and they've gamified it, right? And so now, instead of going to one of the almost about 14,000 neurologists here in the country, you can go to one of the 250,000 primary care doctors. And so that's the way they distribute. And so the way it works is when you go to your primary care, they hand you an iPad and you take this 5 or 10 minute exam. No longer needs to be administered by an actual human being. And they can also send you the app at home, but typically they do it in the office. Now, 1/3 of dementia is preventable. Preventable. But the problem is none of us have that baseline on our brain health the same way you do cholesterol and blood pressure. And so this takes care of that problem. The patient can get their brains checked once a year and really catch things like dementia early when they're still treatable by things like pharmaceutical intervention and lifestyle behavior modification. Okay, so this is very cool. The error rate for understanding spoken English has dropped to under 3%. For context, if you are American-born native English speaker, like myself, our error rate is 4%, which means AI now is better than Americans at understanding spoken English. And this is hitting healthcare in many ways. So first, a raise of hands in the room. How many people have seen the EMR chatbots yet? Epic has one, eClinicalWorks has one, nice. Okay, AI gets better the more it's used. And so yes, the giants are all launching their own chatbots. Cerner was prototyping theirs last year. I'm not sure if they're on the market yet, but if they aren't, they will be soon. And it works the same way as Amazon Alexa. You go up to the EMR and you say, hey, Epic, pull up Robin Farmian's lab results from today, right? How cool is that? Now, patient engagement and aging in place, I will talk about in just a few minutes. But first, I want to talk about vocal biomarkers. Now, this is an area you may never have heard of. It is a brand new area of healthcare. What it means is using the patient's voice as one data point that could potentially lead to an overall diagnosis. And by voice, I mean their tone, their pitch, the way they string words together over a period of time, their speed of their speech. And of course, thinking about things like bipolar, right, manic depressive, you could even as a therapist or a doctor, you can pretty much tell if somebody's in manic or depression by the way they're speaking. So vocal biomarkers are that same concept, but essentially on steroids. I can tell you about a couple of companies. So Sond Health, they are the giant in vocal biomarkers. So if there's anything that you want to look up for this, I would go and look see what Sond's doing. Now, not only are they doing things like depression and sleepiness, which are pretty obvious, but they actually have a COVID test now for employers. So imagine you have something like a warehouse, and the employees are going to their job every single day. So they do the standard coronavirus type things, which is take the temperature, answer like a 2-question test, like have you been, or to your knowledge, exposed to the coronavirus? And then they take a 6-second vocal fingerprint. And they compare that day to day to day. And of course, it's the AI that's doing it. AI is not making a diagnosis. It's just measuring the risk of disease by identifying certain symptoms that the human ear might not be able to pick up. Now, another really cool company is a company called CarePath, based in Germany. Germany has a lot going on in the world of digital health. They're trying to be the center of digital health. So I'd like to see what's coming out of Germany. This company is what they're doing is categorizing coughs. Now this is cool. They come with 2 microphones that you put in, say, the living room. And then if you have, say, a family of 4, but you only really care about little Jimmy's cough because he has bad asthma or something like that. And so the software takes a vocal fingerprint of little Jimmy so that they can actually identify little Jimmy in a crowd. And then they take his age, weight, sex, all of that, because that all goes into the way someone's voice sounds. And then imagine they're all in the living room and little Jimmy coughs. Well, the software is able to detect, yes, that was in fact little Jimmy who was coughing, and then they will categorize the cough. Was that a wheezing cough? Was that a productive cough, right? Was that a whooping cough? You can imagine how pediatricians are going to be able to use that kind of thing. All right, raise your hands. How many people already own a smart speaker, like an Amazon Alexa or Google Home? Nice, quite a few of you. So about 1/3 of the US owns a smart speaker already, and that's expected to increase to about 55% over the next couple of years. And Amazon Alexa is HIPAA compliant. This is huge. There are a lot of companies that are building Amazon Alexa skills. Now, a skill is to a smart speaker the same exact thing as an app is to a smartphone. It's just what they're calling apps on smart speakers to differentiate them from things like the smartphone. And so Amazon Alexa, you can make a skill quite easily. Companies like Express Scripts have one specifically so patients at home can say, hey, when's my medication coming? Or refill even. Companies like Livongo, if you haven't heard of Livongo yet, it's a chronic disease management platform that was bought by Teladoc, one of the largest telemedicine companies, last year for $18.5 billion. Nice work if you can get it, right? So Livongo now has a smart speaker app. So what you do is you go up to Amazon Alexa and say, hey, Alexa, ask Livongo what my glucose readings were for earlier today, because it works with the CGM, the continuous glucose monitor. And we're seeing the big private payers starting to do Amazon Alexa skills as well. So Cigna and Aetna, they're doing things like QA databases, so patients can ask questions. And they're doing things like, where's the nearest emergency room? Or what's the wait time? They also are helping manage health goals. The private payers are now in their patients' lives with a personal relationship and daily touch points. That's a pretty big deal. All right, raise your hands. Anyone work with any of the hospitals or systems? Nice, that are on this slide, woohoo! Okay, so these are the cutting edge in the world of building Amazon Alexa skills. So Mayo Clinic was the very first one. I think it was 2017 that they had their Amazon Alexa skill, but most of these have been created over the past couple of years. So Boston Children's partnered up with Seattle for one around the flu. Boston Children's also has one that's post-surgical, so that the care team, when you bring the child home after surgery, you can interact with Amazon Alexa to give updates to your provider, right? We're seeing other companies using it for where's the nearest emergency room, or what's the wait time, making appointments with your provider. We're also seeing them being used in the actual hospital. You can imagine things like the surgical suite, so that the surgical team does not need to touch a computer. They can interact instead by using Amazon Alexa. And we're even seeing it in patients' rooms. So the patient can control the television, control the lights, the curtains, and interact with the care team or the nursing outside their room. Remember how I mentioned Best Buy a little while ago, and they're the ones who launched TytoCare's telemedicine tools? Well, had you asked me, like, 10 years ago, if Best Buy was going to be a healthcare company, I would have laughed, right? But it's 2021 and anything is possible. Best Buy has gone all in on connected care, especially as it pertains to aging in place. So not only do they have the TytoCare, they have things like the WeThings smart scale so that the scale can integrate as a remote patient monitoring device. They have connected blood pressure monitors, and they have this, the Lively Flip Phone. So this Lively Flip Phone, what it is specifically for seniors. It's a stripped-down version of a smartphone, connects to Amazon Alexa, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, urgent care. So you can just use your phone with Alexa. If you happen to have an Apple Watch, it will hook into the Apple Watch and will do things like fall detection. And again, this is on that subscription model. Now, Best Buy has teamed up with Kaiser, and they have sent Lively Flip Phones to all of their Medicare patients so they can monitor them in-home. Now this one's cool. CVS just launched this one. It's called Symphony, and it comes with its equivalent of an Amazon Alexa. It's their own smart hub. And it comes with wall sensors. So the wall sensors are doing things like room temperature monitoring and air quality, but it has one sensor specifically for the bathroom that is a motion sensor, and it will detect falls in the bathroom. And so you can imagine you've got your seniors at home, and they can control and or integrate everything by using their voice instead of trying to hunt around for buttons. And it does have that wearable tech that's on the patient as well. Their deluxe model is about $250. They've got a cheaper version, and then it ranges between $30 and $40 a month subscription model, depending on what level of care you need. This one is super cool. This is called the LEQ, and that's, again, specifically for aging in place. It comes with the smart speaker, the smart tablet for videos and all of that, as well as that video camera at the top. So it does the typical things that you would think. Medication reminders, grandma can say, hey, LEQ, call my doctor, or hey, LEQ, call my son. In addition, because it's artificial intelligence enabled, it has the ability to learn. And so it learns grandma's schedule. And it makes a note. And when grandma walks past every day, right around 9 a.m. to get a cup of tea, if grandma doesn't show up one time, LEQ will get worried. LEQ will ping grandma, no response, immediately will ping the care team and emergency services if needed. All right, digital therapeutics. This is another area you might not have heard of yet because it's so new, but we are going to see this explode over the next 6 years. In fact, globally, the market was just under $3 billion in 2019, and that's, again, expected to increase to $14 billion. Again, you don't need to remember those numbers. You just need to know that there is a massive upswing in digital therapeutics. Now, what a digital therapeutic is an app that works in conjunction with medication and therapy or your provider. This is not supposed to be a replacement for anything. This is supposed to be that enhancing tool that can help make some of these diseases a lot better. So give you some examples. One on the left, this is Pear Therapeutics, which is one of the leaders in digital therapeutics. And they have 3 clinical grade, FDA cleared apps. One is for insomnia, and the other 2 are for addiction. One's specific for opioid use addiction. Now, these are not yet reimbursed, but the pharmacy benefit managers, the PBMs, are working to figure out how to make these reimbursable. In fact, Pear just did a Series C raise purely to spend the money on that reimbursement component. Now, remember back when I was talking about Amazon moving health home and them adjusting reimbursement? Well, we're seeing that here with the PBMs and with startup companies like Pear. Now, what these do what they're using actually is CBT, cognitive behavior therapy. And that's a gold standard when you're talking about things like depression, insomnia, and addiction. Now, Click Therapeutics is another one that I like to point out. because the big pharmas are getting in on it. So Otsuka Pharma is a neuropharma, and they are investing up to $300 million to co-develop an app around major depressive disorder. Boehringer is investing up to $500 million to co-develop an app around schizophrenia. You know, when the big pharmas are starting to put in massive funding into an area, you need to pay attention. This one's cool. How many people have known or have a child with ADHD? Pretty much, I mean, all of us know a kid with ADHD. Well, this just passed the FDA last June. It is so cool. It is a video game that treats ADHD. So the way it works is it's prescription required. This is clinical grade. If you've got a patient between the ages of 8 and 12, they play this game for 30 minutes a day. And it teaches them how to focus instead of be distracted. And this is what's called experiential learning, right? Learning through experience, which is how we like to learn to begin with. And it's a really fun game. Now, it's also built into the software that after 30 minutes, it immediately locks. And so you don't have, your 8-year-old playing it all day long, right? This is really to teach them how to focus and then, of course, stop at the end of 30 minutes. And virtual reality in healthcare. Now, this is an area that I work in. And so I want to tell you how the technology works behind the scenes. So first of all, the military has been using virtual reality for PTSD for years. They do what's called immersion therapy and repeated exposure therapy. They put the military guy back into the environment that caused the PTSD, and so they get exposed to it over and over again, and they are in a power position where they can control the situation. So it's working really well. We're seeing it being used in things like pain management. Good hospital to keep your eye on for that is Cedars-Sinai. They've been using it for immediate pain. So wait a sec, raise your hands in the room, by the way. How many people have used high-end VR, like the Oculus Rift or the HTC Vive? Okay, a few. I would recommend next time you have the opportunity to use an Oculus Rift or an HTC Vive, absolutely, because you will understand why we are able to essentially train the brain through using this. And so places like Cedars-Sinai, you can imagine a burn unit. And when you change the bandages of a burn patient, it's incredibly painful. So what they do is they put the patient in the world of virtual reality right before they start changing the bandages. And it could be something like, a game done in snow, like calming things, right? But this high-end VR has that ability to disassociate from your body. And that's essentially what it's working. It's massive distraction, but on a level that nothing else will equal besides virtual reality. And so it really helps patients in that time period for things like changing the bandages, or maybe they're getting something like a colonoscopy done. Now, we're also seeing it being used in stroke and brain injury rehabilitation, which is so cool. Now, the way it works is, imagine you have a patient who's post-stroke and their left arm is partially paralyzed. Well, VR uses what's called mirror therapy, which has been used in physical therapy for years, but we're using it in VR so it looks completely realistic. So what we do is we take a mirror image of the healthy arm, layer it over the left arm, and in the world of virtual reality, when you move your right arm, it looks to your brain like you are also moving your left arm, and that's enough to trick the brain. That is enough. It's incredible. We're seeing dramatically improved patient outcomes and efficacy. Not only that, but it's super fun. Instead of having to go to physical therapy a few times a week, you can have one of the telerehabilitation VR sets, and you bring that home, and you can do your physical therapy every day at home. The data goes to the provider and the physical therapist, so they know you're actually doing it. And not only that, but you look forward to it, because it's playing a game, and sometimes it's doing things like flying a plane, but not as the pilot. You get to fly as the actual plane. Now, they're also treating things like phantom pain. So you get phantom pain when you, say, have a patient who's had their left arm partially amputated. And sometimes the brain still thinks it's there, so it's just constantly hurting. Well, how do you treat pain in something that no longer exists? It's no longer a limb issue, and it's now a neuro condition. And so we use that same mirror image technique, layering the good arm over the missing arm. And that one session is enough to trick the brain into thinking the arm now exists, and it turns off phantom pain permanently. This is how incredible virtual reality is. So all of this technology, I've really raised the bar on the interaction between the patient and the physician. And so if you look me up, you'll see the title of my first book is called The Patient as CEO. I want to describe that here because sometimes people think that means the patient needs to be a clinician or a provider of some kind, and that is not what it means. See, compare it to a CEO of a corporation. You're not necessarily an expert in finance, legal, engineering, operations. You hire the best experts. They do their job, and together, as a team, you decide on a direction for the company to go into. But as CEO, it is your ultimate responsibility that that vision is carried out and that the company overall is successful. So I ask, why should being a patient be any different? Right? You know how much money you have to spend, what you want to do on a daily basis, how you want to feel. It is your ultimate responsibility to execute and actually do treatment plans, but you bring on the best experts, the best doctors, nurses, hospitals, whatever you need, so that they can give you the good advice. But I recognize that being a patient is absolutely terrifying, right? You're terrified. And it may be too overwhelming to be the CEO of your own healthcare team. And so that's why I'm calling the health and life coaches now the COO of the healthcare team, who can really help the patient. Now, this is being done in part by artificial intelligence. Amazon Alexa is a form of health coaching, right? So being in the patient's life on a daily basis. This can also be done by customer service representatives, because sometimes it's not a medical problem. I mean, take, for example, you've got a patient who is supposed to go to physical therapy 3 times a week for her hip, but her driver's license expired and she has no idea how to get to the DMV to renew it. Is that a healthcare problem? I mean, she's skipping her physical therapy. We're recognizing, yes, that is actually a healthcare problem. So someone on the team that can figure out, okay, it's not that she doesn't like physical therapy, it's that she needs help getting there. And then there's other companies like United Healthcare. So I'm a high-risk patient, I'm expensive. They now have assigned a nurse to my case for years. And so I have my own nurse at United. I can call anytime I want, and she calls me once a month to check on me. Says, hey Robin, how you feeling? Just checking on you. She says, let's go over your list of medications. And then she says, you know what, are you able to get to your doctor's appointments? Because if not, we're gonna help you do that. Which is why we are seeing these huge health departments at Uber and Lyft. So Uber and Lyft now qualify for CMS's NEMT, non-emergency medical transportation. And so they've partnered with Epic and Cerner, and so now the provider can order an Uber or a Lyft for their Medicare patients through the EMR. They can also order an Uber or a Lyft using a landline and coordinate with the patient using a landline if they don't have a smartphone app, right? So making sure that the most vulnerable people actually can get to their provider's appointments. And this is incredible because I mean, previously, when you used non-emergency medical transport, a lot of the time it would be a big van, and you've got to pick up a whole bunch of other patients. And so going to the doctor would kill like an entire afternoon. But this now makes it much easier for the patient because they can just walk outside and the Uber's going to be right there, and they're not going to go and pick up other people. So really thinking about that customer service aspect, too, of being a patient. Now, we are going to go ahead and take some questions, but first I want to say thank you. So thanks, guys. So yeah, we've got about 15 minutes to take some questions, and I believe that there are microphones running around. And I think you can raise your hand if you want to ask a question. I can't see that well from here. There we go.
So I heard you ask, or you mentioned that you can get your IV within a couple of hours. I live in a rural area in Montana. How is what you're doing and the AI and all of these companies addressing rural healthcare, because it continues to be an issue?
So she asked if how these apply to rural healthcare. Well, the really cool thing about these technologies are they are incredibly inexpensive compared to outfitting big clinics. So you can take a lot of the point-of-care diagnostics, things like the TytoCare. They are being distributed in schools and like sporting arenas and things like that, so that you can outfit a rural clinic very easily for hundreds, if maybe single-digit thousands, as opposed to what it would have cost even 10 years ago. Not only that, but because a lot of these are remote patient monitoring, or they're devices that you can actually see video, like TytoCare, you can send these to your high-risk patients, because it's going to be cheaper to give them a $300 telemedicine kit, right, than for them to get so sick that they require a hospitalization. So not only are these devices so much more inexpensive, but then when you've got that artificial intelligence component, you see, the incremental cost of an app is negligible. The incremental cost of delivering care in a clinic is quite large. So if you can deliver this artificial intelligence to the patient and have something like a nurse practitioner on video helping them out, you can keep healthcare costs significantly lower than you would have otherwise. Now, for things like the IVs in home, there is a lot going on, especially in the world of clinical trials. And so things like Science 37 and even UPS has their own division called Markin, and they are doing remote clinical trials. And the way it works is they mail the medication to the patient's home, and they've partnered with big companies like Sanofi, which is one of the largest of the big pharmas. And so you send the medication, and then if it has to be infused, they can deploy a local nurse, but a lot of the time, clinical trials aren't necessarily infusions, right? So a lot of the time, they can just be taking a pill. And when Science 37 sends you this, like the medication, they also send a smart tablet so that all of your visits happen over video. So now, even as someone who's in a very rural environment, can get access to some of the most cutting-edge clinical trials by using this type of a method. And the industry is going this way. As I mentioned, I'm working on remote patient monitoring for oncology, not just the treatments, but the clinical trial aspect. And so one of the biggest problems with clinical trials is that we can't fill them. Like, there's just not enough patients. And when you pick a geographic location, of course, you're limited to that patient pool. But by bringing things like this virtual, all of a sudden, now you can access anybody in the United States. Does that answer your question? Sure.
Hi, I had a question in regard to the non-EMT. Is that strictly for Medicare patients and commercial? And would that also apply taking them back home, or just strictly bringing them into the office?
Yeah, it covers both. So the Uber or the Lyft will go and pick up the patient and then bring them home. And right now, as far as I know, it's only NEMT under normal Medicare. I don't believe the privates are paying for this yet, but that might be in the near future. But you really worry about this most of the time anyway with your Medicare recipients. Do we have more questions? Over here.
Hi, I was just wondering if you could give me the information again regarding the diabetic retinopathy.
Sure, that's a company called IDX, and it's just the software part. I also wanted to tell you guys a little bit about Amazon Alexa skills. Thing is, making one of those new apps for the smart speaker, if you know what you're doing in terms of engineering coding, it can take less than 5 minutes. So Amazon and Apple, they make these things so easy for the developers to actually create that your hospital or clinic can have an Amazon Alexa smart skill like same day, right? You can make a very simple one.
I have a question.
Sure.
How does the billing work for something like TidalCare? Or is that what it is, TidalCare?
TidalCare. So right now, I believe they're still just direct to consumer, but they've priced themselves for that reason. So the $300 for the kit all in, and then $60 to $70 for that telemedicine visit. So that may or may not be covered, depending on your insurance policy, but they have made it cheap enough that you can avoid an emergency room or an urgent care if you don't have insurance. But it should qualify for most of the things as a telemedicine visit. They are using Amwell. Can't see. Over here. This is a giant room.
Hi, are there any other narrow AI approaches besides the diabetic retinopathy that you know of that are close to completion and implementation?
No, this is still the first one that I have come across. In that handout that I gave you guys with the 15 links, one of those links is to a database of all the FDA-cleared AI software. And now things like diabetic retinopathy are much easier for a software program to be able to identify because it really is that imaging analysis. But most of these really still do need that radiologist or the ophthalmologist to read the scans. That's a first in a lifetime. I'm guessing it's going to be 5 or 6 years before we really start seeing a lot more artificial neurointelligence actually really replace that one thing that the doctor does. Can I see? Any other questions? Is everyone too shy or did I blow your mind too much? Blew the mind. Can't see. Okay, if that's it, then we have 6 minutes. Otherwise, I will just say thank you to everyone and go and catch me. I'm gonna be around till about 2. And if you're doing anything really cool or anything that would fit into the type of theme, definitely put it in the chat of the app because I'm always looking for great examples that are already being used in the clinics or in the healthcare system somewhere. So I would love to know, tell me all the stories that you can. With that, I will say thank you.